Hello, I'm Org, and in this video I'm going to do something a little bit different to usual. I'm going to be talking about the differences between heavy and light cruisers, and why a game like World of Warships should try and get these ships in at every tier. And basically it's because, well, heavy cruisers and light cruisers are actually two very different classes of ships in many respects. Historically speaking, light cruisers developed early in the 20th century for two main reasons, well, three main reasons. The first was, there was an idea particularly propagated by France that in future wars were going to be won by, torpedo boats attacking battleships and small fast ships attacking enemy convoys so that they couldn't get supplies or couldn't get trade back to their home country, and that country would just shrivel up and die. And basically they needed ships to attack those convoys. They would need to be fast, need to have not necessarily big guns, but effective guns, and didn't really need armour. And those ships eventually became, well, it's a role that was done by the light cruisers. Also, you need ships to defend your convoys against it. Well, at the time they didn't actually usually have convoys. You needed ships capable of patrolling, covering large areas rapidly, and doing so very efficiently. Which kind of means you need a ship very similar to the Raider to defend your shipping, so that was also done by the light cruiser. And you also need a ship to defend your battleships against enemy torpedo boats and the like. And at this time, destroyers weren't really seaworthy enough to accompany battleships outside of coastal waters, so you needed a slightly larger ship with a lot of small guns that also had to be pretty fast, had to be seaworthy, had to have a long range. And again, that's the light cruiser. Over time, those roles, it kind of got phased out of them a bit. The scouting and defending the battleships role, battleship screening role, kind of fell to destroyers a bit more as they became more seaworthy. The convoy raiding eventually fell to submarines, which are just much sneakier than a light cruiser, and probably cheaper to put lots of them out into the ocean. And convoy defence, well, when they started putting ships in convoys, it's actually, people just got away with using frigates or corvettes even to fight submarines, and just chucking the occasional cruiser and destroyer in there to beef up the defences against surface raiders. Now, heavy cruisers actually came along a fair bit later. The Hawkins class was the first, that was a First World War design, but most countries really only started getting into it in the 1920s or the 1930s even. Basically, the heavy cruisers were, well, they were basically designed as light cruiser killers. Basically, the convoy defence role, which I said earlier had been done by light cruisers, they were expected to be backed up by battle cruisers, which essentially, once the light cruisers spotted the enemy raiders, the battle cruisers would converge and use their overwhelming firepower to just destroy whatever commerce raiders they could find. Only problem with that was that battle cruisers are incredibly expensive, so you couldn't really put many of them in the field, or out at sea in this case. So the idea was you get ships which are powerful enough to destroy light cruisers, but unlike battle cruisers, they weren't really expected to also fight in the battle line alongside and against enemy battleships. And that's kind of what the heavy cruisers were. Patrol ships, they were fully capable of killing light cruisers. They were also screened the battleships as well, helped drive the enemy light cruisers off and allow your destroyers or your battleships unimpeded attacks on the enemy. And because of that, they were designed kind of slightly differently to light cruisers. I mean, obviously, the heavy cruisers had bigger guns. They also had armour sufficient not to defend against other heavy cruisers, usually, but usually enough to keep out light cruiser shells. They also, roughly the same speed, but a lot less manoeuvrable because they relied on their armour and they relied on their firepower to get things done. Whereas light cruisers, they were fast, only armoured enough to defend themselves against destroyers and the 4 or 5 inch guns that cargo ships tended to have, but they didn't need any more armour than that for their job. They relied on speed, manoeuvrability to survive, get into a position where they could attack, get out when trouble was coming, and get away to strike again. Now that's all kind of good historically, but the thing is that reflected in the game like World of Warships, and it actually really is. I've kind of done some... well, first off I'll just say here that, basically just summarise all of that and put it in the context of World of Warships, is that light cruisers are very good at killing destroyers, but heavy cruisers not so much. Heavy cruisers don't have the rate of fire of destroyers, so you really have to be a really good shot to be able to hit with a heavy cruiser, and you can't really adjust your fire because it's simply too long between salvos and the destroyer is probably manoeuvred by then. They also have a lot worse manoeuvrability for dodging torpedoes and bringing your guns to bear, and they tend to have worse turret traverse times, which also helps, well, hinders you tracking fast moving targets like destroyers. So light cruisers, of course the opposite of all of those, they're very good at killing destroyers. Heavy cruisers not so much. But heavy cruisers are very good at killing light cruisers. They have armour to protect against shells 155mm and smaller, usually. There's quite a few exceptions. They don't really, their poor rate of fire and poor turret traverse don't really matter against light cruisers, because light cruisers, you can see them a long way off, you can angle your ship effectively early on, and you can kind of maintain that angling. And the shells hit so hard that the rate of fire doesn't matter that much, especially if you're firing armour piercing into the citadels, which light cruisers tend to have very poorly armoured citadels and quite easy to hit ones. But yeah, light cruisers struggle at killing, well, they don't struggle at killing cruisers, they're just not as good at it as heavy cruisers are. Same as heavy cruisers don't really struggle to kill destroyers, they're just not as good at it as light cruisers are. And I've actually gone into the World of Warships stats, I suppose you'd call them, and drawn out lots of performance figures for the different ships. And I've kind of graphed two of the important ones here. The first one I'm going to show you is the damage per minute of every main cruiser in the game. Mainline is a non-premium, non-gift cruiser in the game. This one is damage per minute in high explosive. And you'll see the light cruisers are in blue, the heavy cruisers are in red, and you can pretty clearly see that the damage per minute for light cruisers actually tends much higher than heavy cruisers, at least on a tier for tier basis. And if there were lots of light cruisers above tier 7, you'd see some pretty monstrous DPM rates, at least if the trends continued. Whereas heavy cruisers they don't have the DPM that light cruisers do, and DPM is really what you want, well, with high explosive shells, is what you really want when you are killing destroyers. I'll also mention that that light cruiser at tier 8 is the Mogami with its 1,555mm guns. I figured that counts as a light cruiser, just for the sake of argument. I've also got another graph I'll show you here, which is the damage per minute with AP. And you'll also see again that light cruisers they have a higher DPM rate with armour-piercing shells than heavy cruisers. But of course this doesn't take account for the extra penetration that the large caliber shells of heavy cruisers have compared to light cruisers. And just to talk about that a bit, in terms of, I kind of averaged the DPMs for all the ships. Firing higher explosive, the light cruisers average 116, well, just over 116,000 damage per minute. That's firing high explosive, while the heavy cruisers average 132,000, and a lot of that comes from the Des Moines, which you see is the highest DPM with high explosive. It's actually absurdly high compared to the other heavy cruisers in the game. But it gets a bit more interesting when I only look at tiers 5, 6 and 8, which are the ones that have both heavy and light cruisers, so you can make a direct comparison without tier effects coming into play. And in that situation, the light cruisers do just under 168,000 damage per minute, while the heavy cruisers do 102,620 damage per minute. So you've got a pretty significant advantage there to the light cruisers in terms of, destroyer killing ability. They've got, well, it's almost 70% better DPM than the heavy cruisers. And that's also true for armour piercing, but not quite to the same extent, of those three tiers, the light cruisers do 280,000 DPM, while the heavy cruisers do 170,000 DPM. But again, that doesn't account for the greater armor penetration of the high caliber shells. So, as I say, light cruisers very good at killing destroyers, but after I'd done that I decided to take it a little bit further, and I pulled out a few other statistics: the turret reverse speed, the turning radius of the ship, the rudder shift time, and basically what I decided was that those three statistics were the most important of the easily accessible statistics for engaging destroyers. The turret reverse is important to bring your guns on target, especially if you are manoeuvring, and the turning radius and the rudder shift time are very important for dodging torpedoes and keeping yourself alive if you're in a close range engagement with a destroyer. I also got the speed out because the speed is very important for engaging enemy destroyers. And basically what I decided to do was to put these figures together to basically just rank all the cruisers in game at their best, from best to worst at killing enemy destroyers. And I'll just talk a bit about my methodology because it's kind of ad hoc and you could easily criticise it. Basically what I did is I got the DPM for high explosive, as you've already seen. Basically the ship with the best DPM, in this case the Des Moines, got 1 point. The ship with the worst DPM got 31 points because the Mogami counts twice, so there's 31 ships in total. And I basically did that for the radius and the rudder shift time and the turret rotation time. And then it was just kind of a case of the ship with the least points is the best, the one with the most points is the worst. With two kind of caveats. The first is that I decided that DPM was about roughly equal to the other three combined, so I divided the score I divided the DPM score by 3 and let the other ones go at full marks. Wait, is that what I did? I'll just double check here for a second. Yeah. Oh no, sorry, the other way around. I divided the other ones by... I combined them all, divided them by 3, so it's roughly equal to the DPM score. And then speed, I originally did the same thing for the speed, but it didn't seem quite fair to me because a very small difference in speed would get a very huge difference in terms of points added and points lost. Just because so many of these ships have very similar speeds, they're basically all between 32 and 35 knots. So instead what I did is I just decided that 30 knots was kind of the baseline figure, and you lost marks for every knot speed higher than that, and you gain marks every knot speed lower than that. And then, like I said, lowest score is the best ship, and highest score is the worst ship. And, well, say the best 5. The best ship, or the ship with the lowest score in this case, was actually the Kuma, which... it is my favourite ship in the game, but I assure you that's actually just a coincidence. It's a very good ship. It's got very good turret reverse side, very good DPM, very good turning radius, shift time. It's just kind of a good all-round ship. Second best was the Omaha, very similar reasons. Third best, the Cleveland. I'm sure everyone who's played the Cleveland knows why. It has insane DPM, but it's a bit lacking in the other regards. Fourth was the Des Moines. That's basically only there because of its insane rate of damage per minute, but still it came up the top. And fifth was the Mogami class cruiser in its light cruiser configuration. So of the top 5 there, you've got 4 light cruisers and 1 heavy cruiser. The worst 5 I'll also mention. Worst ship by my formula was the Admiral Hipper, which is actually very lacking in damage per minute and not great in other things except for turret reverse. It's got very good turret reverse for a heavy cruiser. Second worst equal was the Furutaka and the Karlsruhe. Karlsruhe is, well, I'll mention the Karlsruhe later on. And then third worst was the Erie, and fourth worst was the Chester. At which point I decided I'm going to exclude tier 1 and 2 because it's kind of not really fair. Although interesting that, you know, a tier 8, 5 and tier 4 ship are actually worse than the Erie at killing destroyers, but whatever. So I excluded tier 1 and 2, which turns the fourth worst spots went to the Baltimore, and the fifth worst spot went to the York class cruiser. So, not a particularly good result there. Well, 4 of those 5 are heavy cruisers. The last one is the Karlsruhe. And from looking at the statistics here, the Karlsruhe actually just looks like a really bad ship. It does poorly in lots of things. Got poor DPM, it doesn't turn that well, it's fairly slow. I haven't actually played the Karlsruhe, but it seems like it's not going to be a fun ship to play. I kind of did the same thing here. I have with the other stats, where I looked at tiers 5, 6 and 8, because those are the ones where you can make kind of a direct comparison and no tier effects are going to be kind of corrupting the data, I suppose. Here, the best ship in tiers 5, 6 and 8 for killing destroyers is the Omaha, second best is the Cleveland, third best is the Mogami Light, fourth best is the Nuremberg, fifth best, Mogami Heavy Cruiser, and that's the highest heavy cruiser up here. Then the Königsberg, the Alba, the New Orleans, the Furutaka, and the Admiral Hipper. So, except for the Königsberg and the Mogami in its heavy cruiser configuration, basically it was all the light cruisers up the top and all the heavy cruisers at the bottom. And that actually just kind of goes to show what we talk about this. The historical differences between these ship classes are actually reflected in game, and they can actually make things difficult for heavy cruisers at high tiers in particular, just because in high tiers they're ships designed to kill light cruisers, but there aren't actually any light cruisers to kill, and instead they fall into the role of kind of protecting against destroyers, which they're actually not that good at. I mean, at least according to this, if you're in a tier 8 game and you're fighting a destroyer, you're better to be in an Omaha than you are in a Mogami class cruiser, because you have a Mogami class heavy cruiser. Just because you have the DPM to survive, you've got the agility to dodge its torpedoes, you've got your speed to trace it down. Whereas the Mogami, and it's got the poor turret reverse, it shells fire fairly slowly, you can't turn as well, you can't dodge torpedoes as well. You're actually much better off to be in a much weaker, because it's a tier 5 ship in that situation, than you are to be in the tier 8 ship. And that's kind of why, really, it's actually probably the main thing I think World of Warships needs, is in particular to have light cruisers at higher tiers, because it actually just makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun for heavy cruisers, because they will not have the same, they won't have to struggle so much to kill destroyers because the light cruisers will be there to do it for them. And at the same time, they've got something to shoot at that they can actually hit and hurt and do so reliably. I mean, at the moment they've got heavy cruisers to shoot at, and a lot of the heavy cruisers have light cruiser armour, in particular the Pensacola, and a few of the Japanese ones as well have fairly low armour. So it's not that bad, just because some of the heavy cruisers are pretty light, but it's just the role they were designed for isn't there in the game. And same as, yeah, it's not so bad for light cruisers because they've got destroyers to shoot at everywhere you've got light cruisers, but battleships actually can struggle to hit light cruisers just because light cruisers are fairly nimble, they are fairly agile, they travel fast, and battleships are none of those. They have a slow rate of fire and quite bad dispersion, which kind of means even at low tiers you need an intermediate ship that's, able to take on light cruisers more effectively than battleships, but will struggle against battleships. Unfortunately, there aren't really that many heavy cruisers you could put in low tiers, unless you start putting in armoured cruisers, but that's a different story entirely. And yeah, that's just to say, one of the things that I really think World of Warships needs is, well, more heavy cruisers at low tiers, theoretically, if it can be done, but really what it needs is more light cruisers at high tier to make the gameplay more, well, just make it more fun, I suppose. I'd also mention that, well, I did ranking all the ships for their destroyer killing ability. I tried doing the same thing for their cruiser killing ability, basically using their damage per minute with armor piercing and a few other stats to try and figure out which was best. But the problem is there's no armor penetration statistics available for ships. So I was trying to get around it by just adding, if you've got a 6-inch gun, you get 15 points. If you've got a 5-inch gun, you get 25 points, and just so on. But it was just far too arbitrary, and I basically just ended up ranking the ships from 1 to 10, more or less, and then just adding this random modifier in there until it kind of looked right to, you know, based on my experience, what ships are good at killing cruisers and which ones aren't, and I just go, that's not really an effective way of doing it. But, just what I'm saying that, the Karlsruhe also turned out bad, and killing cruisers it was lower ranked than it should have been at tier 4, but as I say, that wasn't really a good methodology, so won't bother going into it more than that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and tell me what you think about light cruisers and their role in high tiers, or if they have a role in high tiers, and if heavy cruisers might have a role in low tiers. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.